Hey, what's up guys? It's Christian with the Interactive Immersive HQ. I got some tips and tricks today to help take your renders to the next level, and we're gonna go and take this and turn it into this. So getting right into it, in our template project, we have a base over here called Latticeman, and if you jump right in, you should just see a pretty standard rendering setup with our model here. I've shrunken them down a little bit because the model is a little bit too big. Subdivided it just so that we smoothed out any sort of like artifacting, and then created some tangents on the geometry so that we can insert a normal map into it. So the very first thing we want to do is texture this guy and bring in some texture maps, and I've included in the image directory of the template project, there's this metal material that I got from Ambient CG, and we're going to go ahead and drag the color, the metalness, the normal GL, because we're using OpenGL, and if you've seen the introduction of PBR materials that I did for the channel, we want to use GL because it's describing green as up, and then we're going to pull in roughness as well, and then we're just going to connect these guys. So color, metalness, normal, and roughness. Then our next step is we have this environment light that's just using a constant, so it's just going to be an ambient light. We want to dial this down and light it ourselves. So I'm going to bring in a couple lights in here. So I'm going to have a key light that's shining right in the direction of our camera. It's good right there. And you can see that we're already getting kind of a popping for our material. We're getting that sort of metallic feel to it. And then I'm going to have a rim light that's in the back shading and tracing the outline of our figure. You can see. So now that we have our key light right over here and our rim light on the back of it, you can see we're getting a lot of different reflections that are coming in from the different light sources. And this is going to be the first tip that I show you guys, is we want to get rid of those things and create more shadows and depth to the scene. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to actually take the key light. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Shadow tab, Hard 2D Mapped, and you can see that it's already gotten rid of some of our kind of specularity to the metallic model, where before we're kind of getting some interior lighting, and if we go ahead and take that off, now we're just getting some exterior lighting that's going on. And then to top it off, one of the things that is the best bang for your buck in terms of improving your renders for real-time rendering is we want to add some ambient occlusion into the render. And ambient occlusion, for those who don't know, is just when light is being occluded by surface factors of the model or the geometry that you're using. And there's a technique called screen space ambient occlusion, which we actually have access to as a top. And you can see that once we pop this in here, it's going to create more depth to our scene, where it's getting rid of those interior reflections that kind of create a confusing direction of light, where those interior parts of the model should be shaded. They should be within the darkness. So the next step that I'm going to do to improve our render is I'm going to do away with this kind of annoying ambient light that's just kind of shading evenly our scene, which isn't very realistic. It's not going to create that realistic sense of depth that we want to go for. And one of the tricks that we can go ahead and do is create a secondary scene that is going to hold light information, because one of the things that is helpful within rendering engines like Unreal or offline renderers like Cinema 4D is you can create different shapes of lights. And we have that option when we do hard map shadows. When it's soft, you can create larger and smaller light volumes. But say we wanted to create like a circle, or in this case, I want to round and create that outline of the figure. So I want to go and shoot for a torus. So I'm going to go into our render over here, and I'm just going to make it so that this geometry is only targeting geometries that have the prefix geo on it. And then I'm going to zoom out, plop down a torus, connect this to a geo. And then I'm going to rename this to light 1 because I want to separate the lights that we're rendering from the geometry that we're rendering, because I'm solely going to use this as something that's rendering light. So I'm going to go plop down a renderer, and then I'm going to do light and with the wildcard flag right over here, so that now we're not rendering our guy. And this means that we're going to have to create another camera up top here. And I want to go ahead and zero this out, because normally by default the camera is going to be 5 points away in the Z direction. So this is plop right in the center. This torus, I want the orientation to be along the Z axis, because I want to shade it around the figure of our geometry, not along the midsection. And on this render tab, we have this option to go into and select render mode here. Rather than 2D, I'm going to actually choose a cube map. And that should mean so in our render top over here, I can go ahead and select cube map for the render mode. And I want to go ahead and bring our camera 2 over here as well. So you can see that it's rendering a cube map of our huge torus that's centered around our scene. And then I'm going to connect this to a projection top, because I want to change this cube map projection into an equirectangular, or the way in which HDRIs are rendered is, you have that huge kind of 360-degree view of a scene that will help us create kind of image-based lighting. And we are going to go ahead and plop down a constant. I'm going to pull this into the material so that we're going to shade this evenly white. And then I want to bring down the thickness of it. So it's going to be it's going to be a thin material. And then I'm also going to bloom it. So once we have this proper ring light, I want you to be mindful that if I pull this null into the environment, I won't be able to record this, but it will tank your computer's performance. If you have a really beefy GPU, you'll probably get away with this. It'll maybe drop down to about 30 frames a second if you normally run and chug along a lot at like 60 frames. If I do this with the recording software, it's going to just blow up everything. So you want to make sure that this top, you see that whatever we're going to pull into it, that it's not actively being cooked, because it's going to constantly re-render our environment top. So if I go ahead and lock this so that now this top is no longer being cooked, and you can see that this null is also not being cooked, we're going to make it a little bit easier for us not to just tank the performance of our computer. So I'm going to take this null that I created and then pull this into the environment map and make sure that the dimmer is set to 1. And you can see that now I have a little bit more control of how I can light my scene. Right now I have the environment map rotate to 527, but if we zero this out, I have some good ability to create some interesting rim lighting on the scene, where we're getting some specularity right here, but then also it's tracing the outline of our figure as well, where it's giving us this nice kind of even rim light along the sides, and that's also being emphasized by the rim light that we actually have plopped in our scene, this guy right over here. So if you want to use this technique in more of a real-time fashion where you're moving the lights around, you either have to have a really beefy GPU, or you can go ahead and insert a cache top in between these over here and turn off active. And this way it's actually intercepting the cooking of this top over here, so that whenever we're going to change things in our scene, all we'll have to do is just click pulse over here and you can move things around. Also, you want to make sure that this other render tab for our lights in the scene doesn't have any lights in it either, because we're not going to use anything for any sort of like PBR materials or anything. We're going to be using constant materials, or, you know, maybe specific texture maps on it to create more or less well-lit areas of our light to kind of give some texture to it. But make sure that that's turned off. Otherwise, you will get a cooked dependency. So from here, we're kind of allowed to do whatever we want in terms of our own aesthetic senses of where we think the scene kind of needs to be pushed and pulled. For example, I kind of think that this like metallic map for our guy over here is a little bit too strong. So I'm going to go ahead and pull a null out of our roughness, put that as our roughness map instead, and then just do a little bit of value correction. I'm going to bring up the roughness, bring up the brightness a little bit so that the specularity is kind of, whereas before we were pretty shiny over here, it just kind of diffuses the light in our scene. Also, I kind of want to sort of emphasize more of that rim lighting that we're going for with our environment map, and just go ahead and copy and paste another light over here, sort of bring that in, so that we get more lightness on the contours, just a little bit over. Maybe do one more as well. Edit this one as well, and we're getting some good shading right here, just a little bit over the top as well. So bring this kind of up. So now we're getting some light up there. A little bit more. So now we're getting some kind of like good shading of the form where we're getting that sort of depth, and we can see just how much work our ambient occlusion map is doing, where before this kind of looks like the lighting doesn't really feel very believable. There doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of depth to really kind of shading the interior of our geometry. So once we're pretty happy with our render in terms of the lighting and the kind of different techniques that we're using, what you'll notice is that I can actually pixel peek the geometry, or the top right over here, and you can see that we're actually getting large swaths of areas that are very, very well lit, such that the RG and B values are over 1. And if we have a render that's 8-bit fixed over here, then we're actually just going to clamp those values. All that data is going to get lost. So one of the things that I can do is change this to a 16-bit float, and you can see that it changed the look of it a little bit. But now we're getting some data right here where before we weren't really getting anything. We weren't getting anything at all. And what I want to do here is we have an image that's known as a high dynamic range image, where the values that we're getting are from 0 to positive infinity. And we want to clamp them down to values that are between 0 and 1. So we're going from a high dynamic range image to a low dynamic range image, which is that 0 to 1 range. And there's a couple different ways that we can do this. It's even available to us in the Open Color IO tab, or Open Color IO top. But my preferred way of doing it is I have this GLSL code over here that has all the different tone mapping functions that we have. We can go for ACES tone mapping, AGX. This one is Filmic. There's kind of a whole host of different tone mappers out there, and it's kind of like using different LUTs, where it's going to change the actual output of our image. And if I want to go ahead and use this Filmic tone curve, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pull out and put a GLSL, and I'm going to go ahead, make this active, and then paste this Filmic function right here, and it takes in, if we uncomment this and take this out, where we have our original image that's coming through. But I'm going to go ahead and do color.RG and B for the RGB channels, and that's equals Filmic which is our function right up here, and then do color.rgb and feed that as the arguments of our function. And you can see now we're actually smoothing out those high 1 values, where previously we were getting just 1, and it brings that back into the 0 to 1 range. And you can see that we have a different look to it, where previously we were having very high levels of contrast, whereas now we're kind of tamping them down again. And maybe we can sort of bring up, and that might change the render setup that we have, but we're kind of free to make those choices after the fact. So it's kind of a push and pull workflow to it. So once we've tone mapped, we're kind of into the final stages of our post-processing pipeline. And if I look at this, I kind of want to see maybe a little bit more mid-tones pulled down into our image, where it's kind of lacking a lot of contrast. So that's what this gamma tab we can do, is just kind of pull this down a little bit. And it's going to make it so that our mid-tones, those areas that aren't in highlight, kind of pull down. You can see that it's putting more of this shaded area down, and I can kind of create more of a depth to the scene rather than this sort of like flat lighting that the tone mapper was doing. So again, that kind of push-pull dynamic. Now, the final step for crafting our image right over here is you want to think about the concept of foreground and background, where it's like we have our figure. How are we going to create something aesthetically pleasing with the background? Because right now we're just getting a transparent background, and we're looking for something that's going to pop, but also complement what we're doing. And I've shown a similar technique before, where we're kind of creating a vignetting, but I'm going to do something similar, where I'm going to create a kind of dynamic background. Because if I go ahead and just do a constant and put if it's just flat, no matter what kind of color I'm doing, it's going to be not that visually interesting, right? We have something where it's like, maybe I have something that's kind of like a grayish background or something that's kind of dark. Then it doesn't quite create something that's visually appealing for us. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out a ramp from our image. I'm going to go into the output tab and set resolution only. And I want to create something that's kind of a banding in between, because if you see, and if we think about how our lighting is coming in, we're lighting from this side coming down. So if I swap these over, so I maybe make the value of this one white and this one kind of dark, so that it bands out. And maybe rather than linear, I'm going to kind of make it ease in, ease out, so that there's not just kind of like a like linear gradation between the colors, but it'll actually round out a lot nicer. And I can go ahead and pop this into a transform. And I want to change it so that it kind of matches the direction of our light source coming in. And I'm going to go ahead and tile, and I'm going to put hold, so that now we have this over here. And I found that if I put dither, if you inspect the image, when you do this kind of transform trick, you kind of get a little bit of banding. So if you put dither, then it makes it a little bit more visually appealing. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this into an over and put that over here. And if I now kind of, maybe if I could go and put this into a transform here, because I want to move it down a little bit. If I move this over, then it starts to kind of create not a smooth gradation over here as I put it over. So bring this back over into the middle. Pop the transform on there. So now I can kind of move this, and it's not going to create anything where it's tile. I'm also going to not repeat. I'm going to hold it as well. Just kind of move this over. So now we kind of got this nice light coming in, where it's like maybe I'm feeling like I want to create sort of more of a blue atmosphere to these things. And so that means I should change the color of our figure. So I'm going to pull the color out and do the same thing I did with the roughness map. And I'm going to pull this into a constant, and I want to multiply, so that's good. So now I can kind of create more of a bluish figure. Darker blue, less saturation. And then now we can do the same sort of thing over here, where we bring this blue in, and we're going to make this really dark. This kind of goes in. So after sort of fiddling with this for a little bit and finding the values that I'm kind of looking for, where there's the push and pull of, I have the gammas that the midtones have been brought down. I found that I wanted the figure to sort of pop a little bit more, so I brought the brightness up and then took this ramp and added another stop over here, where it's smoothly kind of filling in this part over here. And then just brought the ramp down in darkness so that we have this figure that's kind of it feels like a cohesive image, but it's also popping in a way that we're looking for, and that's creating that kind of visual appeal where, there's something happening in the background and there's something happening in the foreground as well. If you look at any really good 3D renders, you'll see kind of gobos or textured lights that are coming in the background, or infinite backdrops and things like that, that create that kind of visual appeal where you feel like you're being pulled into the image itself. And so that's not necessarily something that you can kind of just like apply straight up, but it's something that will take some practice in terms of just like looking at reference images and seeing what exactly is creating that visual appeal, that visual interest, because we can have 4K textures, we can have all the kind of compute that we really want, but unless it's deployed in a very tactfully or strategic way to emphasize the visual appeal of the image, it's going to be kind of for naught. So that about cuts it for today. We used a full post-processing pipeline using screen space ambient occlusion. We have our tone mapper over here in our GLSL top. We've done some custom environment lighting over here by creating different area lights that have different shapes, like this torus, and we can obviously switch that out for a rectangle, a square, or a cube. Kind of, you name it, it runs the gamut of all the different kind of shapes that we can do and emphasize and create a look and feel that we're really looking for. So hope you guys liked it.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.